The vast majority of people will spend their entire life pursuing money, a pay increase here, a bonus there, more comfort, less fear, and then they're gone. But Machiavelli would say, what did you really create? Because money that perishes with you is nothing more than lifestyle. It is not power. It is not legacy. It is not wealth. Real wealth doesn't stop when you do. Generational wealth is what survives after you. Framework, reach, systems of control transferred to the next in line. Not only money, mindset, infrastructure, immunity. And that's where the game totally shifts. Because in order to create generational wealth, you don't merely require income, you require architecture, not flashy, not loud, not sentimental, strategic, dull, cold, and most importantly, invisible. Because the true nemesis of legacy is attention. Machiavelli did not live in times of bank accounts and stocks, but he knew one thing that still operates wealth in today's world: power that can be viewed can be hit, power that cannot be traced is forever. So let us look at the first law of accumulating wealth that outlives death. Rule number 1. Do not merely become rich. Create something that leaves you wealthy in quiet. Everyone desires to be a millionaire. Millionaires die penniless all the time, though, because most people create money streams, not systems. They become proficient at earning, but they remain incompetent at holding. Why? Because they attach success to themselves, their ability, their time, their energy, their name, and when you die, so does it. And now your children receive nothing but scraps of cash, and no skill to defend it. So what's the Machiavellian maneuver? You don't just accumulate money, you accumulate something greater than you, something that creates value in your absence, keeps itself safe from public eye, and operates on principles that do not perish with you. This may appear as ownership of businesses you don't operate, properties that make money while you keep quiet, and frameworks, trusts, and infrastructure that protect your wealth from courts, turmoil, and family ineptitude. You're not playing to win, you're playing to survive. Because the real definition of wealth is not what you make, it's what your lineage can't lose without treachery. And that translates to building slow, stealthy, and unexciting, Machiavelli style. Now, let's get deeper. Rule 2. Never let your family inherit weakness. Any prosperous man wishes to leave a legacy behind. But if you leave behind money without mindset, you're simply giving someone the tool that will end up killing them. Machiavelli felt that if you left power in somebody who hadn't earned the right psychology, they would lose it, or worse still, turn into a danger to the house you created. And that's what ultimately happens to most contemporary legacies. The founder accumulates millions. His son squanders it, attempting to be impressive. His daughter marries someone who hemorrhages it. His grandchildren coast off the name but forget the discipline that created it. So, what's the Machiavellian solution? You don't build accounts, you build character. You raise your bloodline like an army, through repetition, through pain, through lack early on, not extravagance. You condition them in control before access. You don't shelter them from reality. You show them earned abundance, not inherited excess, because once they've seen the game for what it is, not about being popular, but about being powerful, they begin thinking like you. That's how a legacy endures. Not love, but structure. Not softness, but armor. Machiavelli prefers to leave his heir a citadel of insight, rather than a kingdom of riches, because he understood the kingdom crumbles in one generation, when the heir's hands are soft, and his voice is loud. So your property, your stocks, your trust fund, that isn't the wealth, that's just the shell. The true inheritance is the way they think. Now let's examine the second layer. Rule 3. Hide the engine. Show the result. Generational wealth fails when it's in the spotlight. It succeeds when it becomes traceless influence. And that requires you to instruct the people around you to never ever expose the origin of your power. Why? Because the moment other people find out how you constructed it, they'll attempt to take it apart. If they can't attack the man, they'll attack the process. If they can't get at the vault, they'll attack the building. So what do? You drive visibility away from control, make people see the lifestyle, make them believe it was gifted, inherited, coincidence. But never let them know the whole machine. That implies that you never put your assets in your own name. You never consolidate your authority in one system, platform, or currency, and you diversify control legally, operationally, and geographically. So when you are no longer here, no one, enemies, or even your successors can kill the entire system by pushing a button, because the more tiers your wealth has, the more sustainable it will be. That is how Machiavellian wealth works. It is not a vault, it's a labyrinth, and only the ones you've well trained will learn to walk over it. Now, here is the most cruel truth of all. You can't create wealth that lasts generations if you're not ready to be forgotten. Machiavelli would laugh at today's preoccupation with legacy, monuments, building names, face-based brands, personality-built empires. He knew that what gets you famous makes your wealth susceptible. You'd rather be remembered by your lineage, not adored by strangers. The world can forget you. Let it, because your name doesn't have to live, but your system must, your framework must, your power must. You construct it so well that your great-grandchildren reap from it without knowing your name. That's how you create generational wealth, not invisibility, but an invisibility tempered with discipline. And when you're dead, nobody is going to party. They won't have to, because the empire you built will just keep on rolling silently, effortlessly, unshakably. The world won't even realize it was yours, but your descendants will benefit from it every day. The delusion of wealth is comfort. The reality of wealth is strategy sustained under duress. Most people get the two mixed up. They believe they're creating legacy because they purchased property, because they have savings, because they have a business. But Machiavelli would smile at that. He would say, "Where's your insulation? Where's the fortress around your value? Where's your leverage when someone comes for what you built? Because what you can lose in a lawsuit, a market downturn, or a marriage wasn't wealth. It was a liability you misconstrued as control." That's where the second batch of rules start. Rule 4. Keep money safe from the people you care about. Machiavelli wasn't emotional. He was a believer in loyalty, but only as it served interest. And nowhere is that more ruthless and more imperative than when you're defending family money. Because the individuals who are most likely to destroy your legacy are the people who are closest to it. Spouses, children, business partners, heirs who feel they know, sons who crave shortcuts, daughters who marry liabilities, relatives with harsh opinions and no skin in the game. So what do? You don't simply shield wealth from enemies. You construct legal and structural firewalls against emotional sabotage. This is bulletproof estate planning, prenups, not to protect against divorce, but to safeguard your bloodline's equity against outside dilution. Trusts with mandatory terms that are not age-related, but behavior-related, and silent ownership over loud-handed giving. You don't give them a spending freedom. You give them guidelines that train them in restraint or exclude them from access. The system has to be resilient enough to survive your death and intelligent enough to bypass emotional appeals, because legacy is founded upon rules, not love. It's founded upon rules that survive the founder. Don't put your empire in the hands of individuals whom you hope will act responsibly. Architect it for individuals who must. That is Machiavellian finance. Love translated into form, not unbridled access. Rule 5. Architect income that transcends trends. You can't pass on a hustle. You can't pass on relevance. You can't pass on your charm, your brand, your virality. If your riches are on you being liked, seen, or famous, then your dynasty will be bankrupt the moment the world forgets your name. So the second rule is this: your income needs to live without your identity. That is constructing cash-generating assets that don't need your face, dull businesses, fulfilling actual needs, independent of market fads, intellectual property, trapped behind entity control, not personal image, and above all, compounding skills and building structures, not peak and disappear. Machiavelli did not pursue popularity. He constructed resilience. And if your wealth is not anti-fragile, it is not legacy. It's a phase. So you need to stop acting like an actor and think like an architect. because the day you pass away, your charm also passes away with you. But your systems, they can either build or break, and if you don't begin planning for that today, someone else will be left picking up the pieces of your failure, wearing a suit they didn't ask for. Rule 6. Train the heir, then test them in battle. Machiavelli hated the concept of inheritance without preparation. He saw kingdoms crumble due to fathers giving sons gold, but not grit. You do not prepare your bloodline by lecturing to them. You prepare them by placing them in the fire while you can see them burning and rebuilding. This is how you do it. You give them responsibility that aches when they fail. You set them in charge of something small, but with actual stakes. They have to work for entry into the family framework. You delay access, not as punishment, but in order to hone their appetite. Because you're not raising somebody to enjoy wealth, you're raising somebody to defend it when everybody else comes to take it. That is to say that they need to know legal defense, not simply spending limits. They have to know how to fire individuals they care about. They have to learn to defend the name, even if it gets them despised. They have to eat with snakes and return with silence, not with tails. If they can't do that, you don't give them more money, you give them more training, because wealth doesn't build character, it unearths it, and your work is not to pray. They might rise, it's to make it impossible for them to knock down what you constructed, even if they attempt it. Rule 7. Legacy is constructed in the background, sustained in the silence. Everybody desires to be known, to possess the name, the statue, the biography, but Machiavelli understood the reality. The more folks know who constructed the empire, the simpler it is to dismantle it. So the last law of wealth for generations is this: let your wealth get roots first before you earn a reputation, because when the glare shines on you, the attacks start. And if you didn't establish defense prior to visibility, your legacy is bait. That is why you build quietly, money under covers, groups behind groups, mastery off stage, and power via surrogates, not shares. The longer nobody knows how strong you are, the more secure your system is, and one day, when they discover what you've left behind, it'll be too late to stop it, too late to tax it, too late to seize it, too late to fault it, because the masses will be playing checkers, as your descendants will be playing chess on a board that you left for them without so much as signing your name. That's how you create family wealth, not through emotion, not through popularity, not through speed, but through a fortress that can outlast betrayal, ignorance, and time. Let the world pursue visibility. Let your lineage bask in silence, and let your name be lost while your dynasty hums for centuries. The richest dynasties in history don't speak, they don't tweet, they don't rationalize, because once a dynasty needs to defend itself, it's already being threatened. That's the Machiavellian way of wealth, through generations. You don't advertise the strategy, you implement it silently, and that starts with the 8th law. Rule 8. Instill the bloodline with a fear of entitlement. The majority of empires are not brought down by enemies. They're brought down by heirs who believe the throne is theirs by right. Entitlement is the most insidious cancer in a legacy, because it spreads within the walls. And Machiavelli's response wasn't motivation, it was constraint. You don't raise your children rich, you make them responsible. If they're looking for a share of the empire, they earn it like a stranger soul. If they're looking to steward assets, they follow you, not live off of your money. If they err, you don't break their fall, you make them rebuild. Because the instant they feel entitled, they let go of what was built, and a legacy that is not protected is already lost. So you build a world where thankfulness is learned, not taken for granted, where the family name is no free pass, but a target to be guarded, where every dollar inherited is handled like a burden, not a privilege. The Machiavellian patriarch does not coddle heirs, he makes them. He knows that an empire is not defended by weakness, it's sustained by those who know what it took to create it. So don't raise rich kids, raise relentless sentinels, or leave them nothing at all. Rule 9. Create wealth to survive emotionally driven choices. Most legacies are lost in moments of emotionally driven mayhem. Divorces, deaths, feuds, lawsuits, addictions, sudden ambition from the least capable family member. The Machiavellian knows this, so he doesn't simply plan the empire, he keeps it from falling apart. That is pre-programmed succession arrangements, well-written veto rights and voting rights, automatic freezing of assets on some triggers, and irrevocable positions without any ability to negotiate under compulsion. Emotion is the killer of legacy. So you create a financial framework resistant to panic, to betrayal, to incompetence. This is why your wealth can't be person-dependent. It has to be system-dependent. Everyone who goes into the system has to play by the rules, not rewrite the rules, not question the rules, not bend them, because the minute you establish flexibility where strictness is necessary, you're one bad call away from burning down 40 years of building. Machiavelli didn't hope for loyalty. He designed constraint, and if your family doesn't have limitations, they will recreate the empire on their feelings and label it as progress as they bring it down to the ground. Rule 10. Never construct what can be stolen. Construct what can be inherited. Stealthily, if your assets can be taken, taxed, frozen, or litigated to pieces, you've already lost. Machiavelli would never leave the empire at the mercy of the world. He'd hide it deep in layers of protection that outsmart governments, courts, and ex-spouses. You don't own your wealth. You own access to structures that hold the wealth. This is international jurisdiction, diversification, protected trust layers insulated from personal liability, holdings owned through operating companies, not individual names, and insurance as armor, not investment. Because when trouble arrives, and it always does, the man who built for show loses everything. The man who built for continuity keeps everything, even if the outside world thinks he lost. This is how actual families work. A lawsuit doesn't come near them. A divorce doesn't expose them. A political change doesn't rattle them. Why? Because the empire is not visible. It's a shadow created by contracts and math. So your work is not to own more. Your work is to own nothing, but direct everything. The enemy can only strike what they can see. Ensure they see nothing. Rule 11. Build for the third generation, not the first. Most men build for their children. Intelligent men build for their grandchildren. But the Machiavellian, he builds for those who will never know him. Why? Because that is how you deskill the emotional and start to think architecturally. This is not about making your kids comfortable. It's about designing a machine that works in cycles of 50 years, not 5. So rather than posing the question, how do I enable my children to live better? You pose the question, how do I establish a system that continues without me? This is why family offices are created, why dynasties keep assets in perpetual trusts, why land remains in foundations, not in personal names. It's all about one thing, long-term sovereignty, because each generation has two options: be a chapter in someone else's book, or be the keeper of a legacy that writes itself. If your last name is supposed to survive your first name, you have to discipline yourself to construct like a ghost, not for self, not for adoration, but for endurance. Rule 12. Silence is the insurance of power. Machiavelli never said so much with so little. The loud are seen, the quiet survive. So when your empire is taking off, you go lower, not up. Lower profile, lower digital trail, lower visibility in ownership, lower risk of being associated. Because if people don't know what you own, they can't take it, they can't resent it, they can't even figure out how to touch it. Let the world name the influencers, the flexers, the showmen. They'll live their lives in the limelight, and one day will pass away penniless, remembered by headlines and lost savings accounts. You'll pass through life as a rumor, a shadow that stirred nations without lifting a voice. And your fortune, it won't be gold alone. It'll be the framework that lasts longer than names, the mechanism that warps time, the stronghold no one can chart. And someday, far longer after you die, your name will be remembered not in textbooks, but on contracts that govern cities, establishments and bloodlines you never knew. That's real wealth. Constructed like war, cared for like a work of art. kept like an heirloom, known only to your descendants, and only if you've taught them well.
Everyone says they want freedom, but freedom without continuity is just a temporary vacation. Legacy is freedom that multiplies. Generational wealth is freedom that outlives your death and defends itself without your presence. That's the level Machiavelli played at. Not rich, not powerful, but untouchable. And that brings us into the final phase of constructing a financial empire that becomes permanent. Rule 13. The empire must run without the emperor. You're not creating a brand, you're creating infrastructure. And infrastructure is not romantic. It's not sexy. It's dull, complicated, behind the scenes. But it's also bulletproof. So the second law is harsh and unadorned. If your presence is needed for it to live, it is not generational wealth. It is just wealth on a clock. Each element of your system has to be able to work without you, grow without you, and protect itself without requiring your charm or brilliance. This involves not merely grooming heirs, but operators, individuals who are familiar with the playbook, who do not need the limelight, and will outmaneuver threats rather than respond to them. You don't need visionaries managing your empire. You need architects of order and keepers of quiet. Machiavelli would never appoint a passionate artist as the master of a fortress. He'd appoint a non-egoist strategist with flawless memory, because the empire doesn't require more emotion, it requires continuity. You're not constructing for growth. You're constructing for resilience. Growth is reactive. Resilience is built into design. So you step back from being the hub of the machine. You are the man who built the engine and then left. And when it still keeps running beautifully long after your name has been forgotten, that's when you've succeeded. Rule 14. Power is the new money, but must be kept separate from the center. Machiavelli would have lived in the era of the internet, but he would never allow public power to touch on private riches. Why? Because fame is exposure masquerading as power. It is like leverage until they cancel you, sue you, tax you, or manipulate your image into ruins. So the Machiavellian constructs two structures: the visible frame, a persona that plays the game, absorbs the hits, accumulates influence, and the invisible core, the safe money that never makes an appearance. Let the world battle for the visible one. Let your enemies attack shadows. Have your heirs inherit a power that cannot be traced. That is, you can scream out in public, but have no assets in your name. You can create a business persona that everyone knows, but the building exists in 5 layers of disguise. You can play the game of attention without jeopardizing the system that actually nourishes your bloodline. So you instruct your brothers and sisters in this Tishmas rule: never mix recognition with control, but let others pursue claps. Let others mark themselves into corners. You print outcomes from the back room. Your visibility never has to equal your protection, and your protection never has to rely on applause. Rule 15. Riches have got to be modular, not monolithic. One of the biggest blunders legacy builders make is overconcentration. One company, one industry, one country, one bank, one tax system. That is not wealth. That is a time bomb. For it takes only one lawsuit, one political change, one economic downturn, and your entire empire breaks. The Machiavellian answer is modularity. Several businesses in different verticals, property owned by individuals in separate legal domains, passive streams of income from opposing markets, and holdings broken apart, so a single failure never overspills into the others. Spider cognition. If a leg gets amputated, you don't hop on one leg, you grow another. That's how the Rothschilds made it through wars, how clandestine families in Asia never show up in news headlines, but happily dominate industries. Their money isn't all in one pot, it's in a constellation of buildings, and most crucially, each component is self-contained, but in harmony, like an army. So when the world strikes at one arm, the others reconfigure. No panic, no collapse, just cold, mechanistic readjustment. That's Machiavellian resilience, not boastful, not brash, just ready. Rule 16. Guard the mythology of the name even if the individual behind it perishes. A legacy without legend is mere money to be forgotten. The Machiavellian isn't merely guarding the fortune. He crafts the legend because stories endure longer than buildings, and significance stores recollection in a manner that contracts simply cannot. So this is what you do. Write the playbook, document the family vision, determine the values your lineage will transmit, codify what the name represents and what it never transgresses. Record your ascent, not for vanity, but for posterity. Because if your successors don't know the narrative, they'll create one of their own, and they'll dilute it with contemporaneity, shame, and outside approval seeking. That's what happens to legacies diluted, not by time but by self-doubt. So you don't pass on property. You pass on interpretation rules. That's how you ensure the empire isn't only retained, but retained properly. Even if they've forgotten your face, they'll remember the code you lived by. And that's how loyalty endures death, not through nostalgia, but through clarity. Rule 17. Make it clear to the bloodline that everything is contingent. Here's the ultimate psychological maneuver. Never make your heirs think that they've won the game by being born. You want them to be loved, but you also want them to realize that everything can be taken away, not because you're cruel, but because you're preserving. You give instructions, sure, but you also give tests. You create a performance-based access system. You insert mechanisms to modify control in case of character failure. For if you give everything condition-free, you're raising users of wealth, not guardians of it. So your framework has to show one hard truth. Money's made even if it's born. That way, every generation that comes next doesn't coast on ease but cuts to duty. That's how you leave fire in the lineage, not merely lifestyle in the vault. And that's what Machiavelli would have done. Not wish for greatness, but code it, pilot it, mandate it. Because money is not the goal. It's only the start of a war. You'll never engage in flesh. So you need to train the next commanders before you disappear. Give them the map, give them the guns, and ensure the walls are too high for the weak to ascend. That's how you create a legacy no storm can reach, a dynasty that breathes power across the ages, a name that doesn't beg to be remembered, but is dreaded even in silence. There's a reason why most legacies are forgotten by the third generation, because they get confused with wealth and permanence. But Machiavelli knew what isn't built for survival is meant to deteriorate. And so we arrive at the last laws, those that divide the remembered from the forgotten, the sovereign from the rich, the empire builder from the entrepreneur. Such is how you fade into the tapestry of history, even as your name continues to mold it. Rule 18. Defer power, hasten discipline. The contemporary world dispenses with access too early. At 18, inheritors are provided with keys to accounts not earned. At 25, they're supposed to deal with legacies they didn't create. Machiavelli would never let this happen. He would postpone power on purpose and speed up discipline ferociously, because what corrupts is not riches, it's early control. So that's the move. You sequence access in phases. Each phase opens based on character, not timing. Assets are released only after specified behavioral norms are achieved. Education, performance, personal behavior, dedication to the family cause. This accomplishes two things. It weeds out the unworthy before they can do harm, and it trains the worthy to appreciate every step they take. Your lineage needs to understand that the empire doesn't bow to feelings. It bows to getting it done. They don't inherit it because they are your child. They earn it because they think the same as you. And when they do, power comes like water, quiet, steady, unstemmable. Rule 19. Educate the authority of owning time. The typical man sells his time. The Machiavellian purchases it. This is the fundamental change every heir needs to know. The instant you trade time for cash, you turn into a servant, even if you are wealthy. Therefore, you need to educate them not only how to gain, but how to separate their riches from work. They have to create devices that work while they're sleeping, own systems that others rely on, amass wealth that earns money in years they're not working, and know the importance of patience. Patience is a strategy, not a vulnerability. Time is the greatest generational resource. If they learn to control it, they will never be mastered by any trend, economy, or emergency. Machiavelli's real students would never hurry for outcomes. They would create systems that leverage quietly while others pursue noise. That's how default becomes freedom, not because they're fortunate, but because they comprehend the power of stillness that's earned. Rule 20. Money is a language. Educate them to communicate it early. Money isn't math, it's psychology, and if your beneficiaries can't read it, they'll misread every indication. So you are educating them about what silence in negotiation is, how to interpret contracts as blueprints of future wars, how taxes aren't penalties. There are psychological incentives to try to guide behavior, and how legislation is drafted by people who got wealth before they got power. They need to learn the code, the unwritten patterns, the economic dialect that exists in boardrooms, back channels, trusts, and sovereign instruments. Because if you don't teach them this language, the world will speak over them, and they'll nod along while being robbed in plain sight. Your responsibility is to make them fluent, so skilled that they enter spaces and utter worth in silence, where their lack of words speaks, where their gaze scans deeper into the documents presented to them, where their name brings warning, not due to recognition, but because it signifies, that is literacy. And that is the way power is expressed without voice. Rule 21. Destroy the blueprint once the empire has been constructed. Here's the last Machiavellian truth. After the building is done, you delete the steps. Why? Because nothing imperils legacy more than predictable power. If outsiders understand how you assembled it, they'll reverse engineer your course. If insiders understand how it was built, they'll seek shortcuts. So what do? You document principles, not course. You teach mindset, not maps. You leave your successors with the ideology, but allow them to discover their own tools. That way, the system endures, the dynasty evolves, and the empire transforms. Each generation has to rebuild some aspect of the system, not for effectiveness, but for possession. Because what they rebuild, they can defend. What is inherited carelessly is ultimately squandered. You are not constructing a device to operate automatically in perpetuity. You are creating something that requires constant intelligence, order, and accuracy. So you leave with power, not instructions. And let the world wonder how in the world it happens behind closed walls where the gears are turning noiselessly. This is how you disappear and still succeed. This is what Machiavelli would do. Not accumulate wealth, not get viral, not sell goods. He'd construct something that lasts, a citadel of rules, structure, control, and quiet. Not constructed from feelings, constructed from laws indifferent to who's in charge. And when you die, no applause, no headlines, just a system so methodical, so durable, so far beyond understanding that people tread past your empire every day and don't even notice they're standing in a world you constructed. That's how you create generational wealth, not to be envied, but to be unbeaten.